A historic outbreak of devastating tornadoes across the Hoosier state. Now emergency responders are working to get people back on their feet. Are Hoosiers prepared to deal with emergencies? The executive director of Indiana's Department of Homeland Security joins us in an exclusive interview. Plus, what is the organization at the center of the education controversy? We're sitting down with one of the leaders behind the agency, State Superintendent Glenda Ritz says is undermining her authority. Then we're talking politics with Congressman Luke Messer. It's all coming up on this edition of Indianapolis This Week.
From RTV6, the Indy Channel, this is Indianapolis This Week with Rafael Sanchez.
We begin this week with thousands of Hoosiers recovering from one of the biggest outbreaks of tornadoes in state history. At least 24 twisters barreled through 20 counties. State emergency management officials say it will take months to get people and businesses back on their feet. This morning, we speak exclusively to the executive director of the state's Department of Homeland Security. Last week, the state opened the Emergency Management Center to deal with the weather's fury. What didn't we see that worked well in the response in those initial hours?
Well, Rafael, and I'd say a couple things. First of all, what we didn't see is all of the county agencies that really ramped up to meet this challenge. They have their own emergency operations centers that work in their respective counties. And so they were working along with NDOT personnel and state police troopers that were out there and forced to make sure that we had people staged. But I would say this. The thing that we are noticing in Indiana is we really have built a tremendous amount of capacity at the local level to respond to emergencies. And I know this from my years. I spent nearly 30 years in the state police in this state. And from my experience, the local communities are much more resilient than they used to be. And I looked over the numbers in preparation for talking to you, and since 2005, we've spent $250 million in preparing for disasters. In terms of tornado damage, it's very hard to predict these things. I think one of the things that we look at always is we try to encourage local communities to look at this concept of mitigation. How can they prevent something in the future? And building shelters, building structures that can withstand such tornadic winds is very important. The other thing on the flood side, this is the second major disaster in Kokomo this year. They had a huge flooding problem in April, and we have spent nearly $30 million in the last 5 years with the help of the federal government to purchase homes that are in flood zones. So we're trying to mitigate that going forward so that we don't face the same scenario every year.
Are Hoosiers prepared to deal with emergencies?
Well, I think we're much better prepared than we used to be. There are always going to be emergencies that come up that are not really something that we expected, and I regret that. Whether it's an active shooter situation or something like an earthquake. We can't predict when the earthquake's going to happen, but we know that we're in a zone or a fault zone that could create that. And so we're doing a lot to really educate the public. We have something called the Great American Shakeout every year. We've been leading actually the Midwest states in terms of participants in that, a lot of school children. So we want to build a consciousness in our citizens that they really understand the need to be prepared.
Homeland Security has a checklist that you can follow to help you to protect your family. We have a copy of that checklist on our website, theindychannel.com. The other big story this week, the state of education. Indiana's top education leaders at odds. More than a week ago, the superintendent of public instruction ended a board of education meeting upset with a proposal she believes was being pushed by the Center for Education and Career Innovation. Ritz says the new agency is attempting to take over the Department of Education.
Since the creation of that agency, the staff who are working with the State Board of Education underneath that agency spend their time undermining what's going on and happening over here at the Department of Education, literally. And it's interfering with what's happening at the board.
And joining us now is Jackie Dowd, a co-leader of the Center for Education and Career Innovation and Special Assistant to the Governor. Is the center trying to either undermine or take away the authority from the Department of Education?
Well, thank you for the question, Rafael. Appreciate the chance to respond. No, simply stated, the governor has developed the Center for Education and Career Innovation for that very purpose, and that is innovation around career and training here in the state of Indiana. And in fact, a number of governors are taking this issue up in the country, how to better align education and training toward meeting the need of the entire pipeline. Part of the responsibility, of course, of the Center for Education and Career Innovation is to do just that, to staff the State Board of Education and to oversee the Education Roundtable, as well as the Career Council and the Works Council, both established unanimously with bipartisan support this past session.
So will you collaborate with the Department of Education? Will you collaborate with any agency or group that is willing to move the agenda of education forward?
Absolutely, and that's the very intention again. So we have a great number of needs in the state of Indiana to continue to not only make progress where we already have in terms of reforms around education and training, but again, to better meet the needs of individuals so that they're ready for the workforce and so that they can be successful in whatever path they choose. So in K through 12, for the Department of Education, that means working certainly with that agency. It also means working with the Commission for Higher Education that has responsibility for post-secondary areas. And then certainly then the Department of Workforce Development is another key agency that we work with that not only serves unemployed and underemployed Hoosiers, but also serves youth. And the Center for Education and Career Innovation seeks to work with those agencies as it carries out responsibilities that the governor has direct responsibility to per statute. And again, to try to align across the entire pipeline for purposes of making sure that Hoosiers have not only sustaining careers that they can pursue, but so that they're able to do that across the entire spectrum.
For folks that may be somewhat confused, they hear about this Department of Education, which everyone knows has been there forever, and now the new center. How do you clear up the confusion? In other words, what will be the differences and where will you have to overlap?
Sure, of course. So governors across the country, again, are taking this up. The National Governors Association is very focused this year in particular on education and training alignment in the states. And in fact, I've been able to meet with colleagues across some other states about this. There have been a couple of meetings in recent weeks where more than 30 states have gotten together and talked about how governors can align across the entire pipeline. And
not to interrupt you, but we should point out that in Indiana, more than 50% of the budget is spent on education.
That's correct.
So, I mean, there's a lot of talk. There's a reason for this, right?
Absolutely. And we have 1 in 6 individuals in our workforce that don't have a high school diploma or equivalent. We have 1 in 3 that don't have the post-secondary skills necessary to be employable over the long term based on what we understand employers need in way of technical skills up to associate degree, bachelor degree, and beyond. And so we have an opportunity to try to make sure that we're looking at the resources across the entire spectrum and also that we're aligning those for purposes of helping us get those in.
Because I interrupted you, I didn't give you a chance to explain where you're going to overlap and what your function will be. How will that look? What will that look like for the public?
Right. So I think a good example of that is to say when we look at the state and federal funds that Indiana has toward education and training, it is to look at what end goals do we have that are common. And for instance, career pathways being something that helps individuals understand from all levels, whether they're in the K through 12 system or they're in post-secondary or perhaps they're already in the workforce but they need to retrain, to help them understand what types of opportunities exist for them and to make sure that we're tapping those funds with the greatest flexibility to help those individuals meet their goals.
A lot of goals ahead in 2014. We hope that you'll come back and continue to educate us and help us understand the work that is ahead of you. Ms. Dow, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Will you come back?
Absolutely.
Right,
Happy to.
The fight over health care and the threat of nuclear weapons. Hoosier Congressman Luke Messer is only on RTV6 this morning to discuss issues impacting Hoosiers. Congress is dealing with a lot of issues right now, and health care is at the center of the ongoing back and forth. The problems for healthcare.gov website drag on as people try to log on. And the deadline is nearing for when the White House said these bugs would be fixed. Now, those who lost their insurance in Indiana because of the Affordable Care Act's requirement may not get their plans back from insurers, despite the president's extension. Joining us now to talk health care and other issues is Indiana Congressman Luke Messer. He represents the state's 6th congressional district. He's fresh to Congress, having just been elected 1 year ago, but he's in the thick of it all. Let's talk health care. Can this be fixed?
Well, I think the thing we need to do in the near term, Raphael, is delay the program. You know, the president's made a series of promises that have turned out not to be true. He promised people could keep their health plan if they liked it. Clearly, that's not happening for millions of Americans. He promised if you liked your doctor, you could keep it. They promised that rates would go down. They promised that the website would work. Those things aren't happening now. And broad cross-sections of Americans of all parties believe that if the website's not going to work, we ought to delay implementation of any individual mandate tax. And I think there's some fixes that we can bring,
for example, give me some
to the
fixes.
law. So there's some. First, I think you start with the parts of the law that people like. 26-year-olds ought to be able to stay on their insurance. We need to deal with pre-existing conditions. I believe we ought to have a state-by-state system of exchanges for folks that have pre-existing conditions. It doesn't make sense that you be charged out of the marketplace if you're already sick. We ought to make some other changes, though, as well. We ought to allow everyone to purchase their health insurance with pre-tax dollars. So businesses can do that. Individuals ought to be able to do it as well. And I think one of the biggest changes we could make is to allow broader state competition, break down these state-by-state monopolies, and say one simple thing, that if you have an insurance policy that can legally be sold in one state, it can be sold in every state. A combination of those fixes and a few others would make a big difference.
2014, will we see those fixes? Or will we see another government shutdown, which is the healthcare law was the thing that kind of led us to that sort of road? Will we see a...
I think the fixes we need in health care are going to have to come in a bipartisan way. Part of the problem with Obamacare is it was passed along only one party line. I think, frankly, as these policies continue to unravel, as this proposal continues to unravel, I mean, there is very real risk that millions of Americans that have insurance today may not be able to afford it or have it come January, February. My hope is you can see a set of bipartisan proposals that fix it.
Another big issue that's affecting our fellow Hoosiers is the issue with these tornadoes. Does the Federal Emergency Management Agency need more money? They're saying that they don't have enough money to handle all these disasters around the country. Would you see more money being shifted to that agency in the event that we need dollars here in Indiana?
Well, disaster relief is one of the clear things the federal government should do. I mean, we're having a lot of debates in Washington today about a role of government that's bigger than it should be. I think, frankly, the president's health care law is an example of federal government overreach, trying to make it too big. But disaster relief is exactly one of the core priorities of the federal government. I would support further efforts to at least make sure we fund that role. I think here in Indiana, we've got a lot of families that are going through tough times. We certainly were blessed with the fact that there were no deaths here in Indiana, but it doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of the catastrophes that we need to be dealing with.
There was some congressional opposition to increasing funding for FEMA with what happened in New Jersey with the hurricane there. Do you think we'll find more opposition to these kinds of programs being funded at the federal level?
Well, the problem in New Jersey, and I actually voted against some of that funding for Sandy, was because it was laden with pork barrel projects that had nothing to do with the disaster.
So keep it to the disaster and you'll support it?
Yeah, of course.
Your hands are also on the issue of Iran. You sit as a Hoosier on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Why should Hoosiers be concerned about what's happening currently in Iran and in Syria with nuclear weapons?
Well, first, Iran's efforts to obtain nuclear weapons are a great danger to every American, frankly, everybody in the world. We need to take those efforts very seriously. We all want peace in the region. Our closest ally in the region, Israel, would like to see peace. I think we need to be very careful, though, in these peace talks that we not prematurely take away the sanctions on Iran. Right now, Iran's economy is being devastated by international sanctions because of their efforts to obtain a nuclear bomb. They want relief from that. I think there is talk that even by this weekend, there could be a peace treaty signed. We're all for peace, but it needs to be meaningful. What Iran must do is declare to the world that they will no longer seek the nuclear bomb, that they will end their nuclear program, and when they do that, we could lessen sanctions.
What would you like to see in 2014 accomplished in Congress?
Well, I think we need to get a budget passed this year. I believe you'll see it by the end of December.
Okay.
You know, a lot of times in Congress, people seem like junior high kids. They see their congressmen acting like junior high kids that won't do their studying for their test until the day before the test. I think it's great that we're already meeting. Frankly, I'm hopeful that both the rollout of the Obamacare and some of the pushback on the government shutdown will humble both sides, and we can come together with some bipartisan proposals that reduce spending and get America going again.
Congressman Luke Messer, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
And please come back again.
Thanks.
When we return, our political insiders with the hot topics of the day. You're watching Indianapolis This Week. Joining us now are political insiders, Republican Jennifer Hollowell and Democrat Lara Beck. The city of Indianapolis considering a panhandling ordinance that it hopes can pass legal muster Will it happen?
I'll let Jen start with this one.
Well, I think it will happen. I think it's welcome and long overdue, frankly. Mayor Ballard proposed this in his State of the City earlier this year. It's going to be very good for downtown especially. And, you know, one of the things that people may not know is we've lost out on 10 conventions and potentially $6 million worth of, you know, economic impact to our city from those conventions because of the panhandling downtown. That was one of the reasons, or the top reasons cited by folks who decided to take their convention elsewhere. So they've gone through a long process and have matched with other cities to make sure that this will pass any, you know, judicial review, and I think and am hopeful that we'll see it pass.
Well, one of the things I think we're seeing in Indianapolis that we don't see in Washington, for example, is that there really is a bipartisan effort to work together, and I think this is a good example of how Democrats and Republicans are working together to address the needs of the downtown business owners, of the convention traffic that comes into town, and of the people who, you know, come down from Indianapolis and use downtown. But at the same time, it's not so overly aggressive that it's going to impinge on people's civil liberties. So I think hopefully we'll get to a good place with it. But this is an example, I think, of how the council Democrats and how the mayor's office are able to work together. And we see a lot of that. We don't hear about it all the time, but we do see a lot of it.
Another big issue this week, the Department of Insurance said to the White House, no way. The president had requested that insurance commissioners around the country make the insurance companies that kicked off people off their plans to bring them back on the plans. The Department of Insurance in Indiana said, we just can't do it. It's not realistic. It's not practical, was their official response.
I think the first point I want to make on that is that in some outlets it was reported inaccurately this week. So a lot of the headlines this week were that the state said they won't allow insurance companies to do this, or that they can't do this, and that's not.
And we were not one of those outlets.
I was going to say, were you one of those outlets? I certainly hope that.
I appreciate that, but it did exist, and so first I think it's important for people to understand what it really is. The president was asking that states force insurance companies to offer policies that they had canceled because of the Affordable Care Act. And what Indiana said is we are not going to force or compel companies to do that. If they wish to offer those policies again, then they can go through the process and have them, you know, recertified. But we are not going to force companies to do that. And, you know, to think about all this, how long this has been going on, these companies have spent a year, 2 years phasing out and you know, repackaging all of this to comply with it. And so, I mean, that's what we're seeing, which is, I think, very reasonable. And by the way, there are, 7 other states who have taken the same step, and those states are all Democrat states. So,
well, I think that what we also are looking at here is that those plans that many of the insurance companies have changed for people are because of the Affordable Care Act, but they're also because those plans were probably not the best plan to begin with for people. So if you did get hurt on your plan, or if you did get sick on those plans, it had the potential to bankrupt you. Some of those healthcare horror stories, those are some of the ones those are some of the ones that qualify. But at the same time, I think it speaks to a larger issue that we're moving toward in Indiana, is that it's almost as if we are becoming this island of the uninsured. And it's hard not to take it as it's a political move by the governor's office. I mean, it's almost as if the tagline on the ads are going to say, he stood firm against Obamacare. In 2016, whether he's in Iowa, or I'm sorry, whether he's running nationally or whether he's running here. So I think that it speaks to part of that larger narrative of there is an effort underway in Indiana to block every opportunity for reform. And the first place we could start by really making an impact in Indiana is by expanding Medicaid. And we're one of the few states that we're just not doing that. And across the river in Kentucky, they're doing pretty well with it.
Let me ask you, on the issue of the Department of Insurance, is it fair to say that they were really looking at the finances of this all and saying, look, we just can't do this in 40 days. We'll be in a new year in 40 days. There's no way to really practically do what you're asking us to do without destabilizing the market. Is that a...
Yeah, I think they're very genuine in saying that it would destabilize the market. It's a thoughtful reaction to it.
I don't work at the Department of Insurance, and so I don't have any idea about how it works.
It's complicated.
How it works. It is complicated. Yeah, it is complicated. But at the same time, it's hard not to be cynical when some of these decisions come down. But partly because every chance we've had in Indiana to do something with the Affordable Care Act, we have tried to block its implementation every step of the way. So
the president is asking states to undo in 30 days something that took him 3 years to implement, and obviously not implement effectively.
We could expand Medicaid. We could do a lot of different things here. We're not doing that.
Uphold the promise that he made to people, which was a lie.
The governor,
that if you have your plan, you can't keep it.
Oh my.
Answer that. Was it a lie?
I think
they knew
that
it was untrue when they said it. We've learned that.
I think the president misspoke. I think he misspoke, and I think that
again.
Okay, I think he misspoke.
The governor of New Jersey was pushing for Chris Christie, pushing for Governor Pence to take a major leadership role within the Governors Association. What's that about? Are we looking at a potential presidential candidate and a running mate?
I think we're definitely looking at a presidential candidate and running mate. But what it says to me, just by observing it, is that Governor Christie has really taken a lot of hits for his bromance with President Obama. I mean, there were a lot of folks in the Republican Party who were very angry with him and very visibly angry at how he embraced President Obama after Hurricane Sandy. So he really needs to shore up that Tea Party base. And Governor Pence has long been a standard bearer of the Tea Party in D.C. So it's not surprising. What is somewhat surprising. Go ahead.
She gets the last word.
Equal time.
Equal time.
Governor Christie is identifying the leadership of Governor Pence, and of course they would want that kind of leadership at the RGA. I mean, it makes total sense, and it's a compliment to Governor Pence, and we're happy to have him in a leadership role there.
And I'm sure on this weekend you're both thankful for each other. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
We are. Happy Thanksgiving.
The conversation between our insiders continues, and they're going to have a great conversation in the green room. You're watching Indianapolis This Week. Former Indiana Senator Richard Lugar received the nation's highest civilian award this week for his years of public service. Lugar received the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his more than 30 years in the U.S. Senate. That's it for this edition of Indianapolis This Week. I'm Rafael Sanchez. Have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next Sunday.